Hey, what's up, YouTube world? It is your girl here, the Venusian Bull, and I am back with another video. So what we're going to be doing in this series of videos is we're going to be discussing the planets in the 8th house. Yes, I know a lot of people have been waiting for this house. Anything that has to do with the 8th house, Scorpio, Plutonian things, people are always curious. People are always interested. They always want to see, the mystique of this energy. So we're going to be discussing planets in the 8th house, and I'm going to be doing this a little bit differently, as I'm going to have an introductory video to get through with all of like the kind of housekeeping details and everything that the 8th house contains, because I'm going to go very much into depth, pun intended, with the 8th house as it pertains to the planets and things like that. And I didn't want to have to say the same things over and over at the beginning of the video like I usually do, because it's a lot of information and a lot of knowledge that I'm going to be dropping on y'all. So yeah, there will be a description in the comment box of the actual timestamp of when I get to that planet in as it pertains to the 8th house. So don't worry, if you've seen 3 of these, you can skip through them if need be and go just straight to, sun in the 8th, Mars in the 8th, moon in the 8th, whatever. Okay. All right. So let's discuss the 8th house a little bit. Okay. So I also want to kind of put a trigger warning on these videos, because the 8th house deals with a lot of kind of taboo topics, the things that we don't really, want to discuss, the things that are buried beneath the surface and things like that, such as sex, such as death, anything that's taboo, and that could be deemed taboo or beneath the surface. That could even mean astrology or tarot or numerology or any type of occult like studies and mediumship, voodoo, hoodoo, all of that shit. You know what I'm saying? Especially when it comes to kind of like worshiping like ancestors and the dead and things like that. The 8th house has to deal with death, so we may be talking about demons and spirits and all of that type of stuff. So again, trigger warning. And this is the trauma house. A lot of the times I always say that Scorpio is the trauma queen, while Leo is the drama queen. So 8th house energy, there's always going to be some type of trauma that needs to be kind of overcome, but you're not going to escape drama. You're not going to escape trauma having 8th house energy. It's kind of inevitable that you will experience certain things. So I went through the basics: sex, death, anything that has to deal with trauma, transformation, regeneration. This is a very transformative placement. You're always changing, always transforming, and it's usually in major ways. This also has to deal with other people's money, as the 2nd house deals with earned income and money that you earn. The 8th house deals with other people's money. So this isn't necessarily money that you work for. This is money that you get from an inheritance, or like spousal support, or like child support, or like a life insurance policy, or something along those lines. And the 8th house also represents debt that you owe. So not only other people's money, but money that you owe to other people. So creditors, like bankruptcy, all of that stuff that we hate, really, right? I also like to think of the 8th house. The 8th house is kind of about turning trash into treasure. It's very much a purging thing. It's about, getting rid of garbage, and things like that, because Scorpio, which rules the 8th house, actually represents, for lack of a better word, excrement. You know what I'm saying? It represents, the waste out of your body. So it could be like literal waste or like figurative waste that you're kind of doing away with. And that kind of goes along with the transformative aspect of the 8th house. And as a reminder to keep in mind that you need to take account the sign that's on the 8th house cusp, as well as the aspects that the planet is making with any other planets in your chart, because this may modify the energy that you are experiencing in the 8th house. So make sure that you take heed of that. Sometimes I state this periodically in other videos, but I want to get this in the first video, the intro video, so that everybody knows that the characteristics that I state for the planet, that I'm speaking about may vary based off of other variables in your chart. So I want to make that very clear, especially when it comes to, the eighth house, because it's so transformative and it's so, intense, it's so in depth that it can mean so many different things. And speaking of intensity and depth, it has to deal with that. It has to deal with intimate bonds, close bonds. It's the next step up from the seventh house, which is like more like commitment and marriage. And the eighth house is that intimate bond that it's not a you and I, it's a we thing when it gets to the eighth house. So it's that as well. And it's, deep, it's about deep connections, and it's about researching, it's about investigating to get down to the bottom and the depths and, the oceans of things. This is a water house. So you have to remember this is an emotional house. People forget that Scorpio is a water sign sometimes, I think, and emotional, because their exterior can be so, you know what I'm saying? It could be very resting bitch face, but remember that this energy needs to feel deeply, like within the depths of their soul. They need to feel right down into their gut. So they need to feel deeply. This house may be prone to experiencing a lot of pain as well, pain and trauma. And usually, in a lot of instances, that's something that people who have this energy, they actually like. So yeah, without any further ado, I'm going to get into the planets in the eighth house. So stay tuned. See ya. All right, hey y'all. So in this video, we are going to be discussing Jupiter in the eighth house. And I didn't mention this in my last video, but usually I wear contacts or my glasses. And actually right now I don't have on either. So like I don't have my contacts in. So I'm blind as a bat, y'all. So if I squint a little bit, it's just because I'm seeing how much time is left. So forgive me. All right. A bitch can't see. Okay. So Jupiter in the eighth. So having Jupiter in the eighth house is similar to having Jupiter in Scorpio or having Sagittarius on the eighth house cusp. Okay. So Jupiter in the eighth house is a very, very interesting placement, because you literally have the great benefic planet full of optimism and luck and expansion and abundance. And you literally have it in the house of death, darkness, transformation, sex, and just really dark and taboo things. And, I'm going to kind of be talking about Jupiter from a different perspective than I usually do, because it's in the eighth house and everything is kind of different in the eighth house, or just water houses in general. You know what I'm saying? It operates a little bit differently. So you have to remember that Jupiter expands things, right? And that could be good or bad, right? So Jupiter in the eighth house could low key actually be the biggest hoe. It could expand your sexual partners, expand your sexual knowledge. Because remember, Jupiter is all about knowledge. So you be wanting to know all of the tea and all the scoop as it pertains to sex. I mean, like, Jupiter is very high level, but when you put it in the eighth house, it gets a little bit more detail oriented. You know what I'm saying? But definitely remember, Jupiter in the eighth can result in a lot of sexual partners, or just, wanting to learn a lot about sex or occult studies and stuff like that. Like, this is definitely like, I feel like a sex education teacher is a little bit too elementary for Jupiter in the eighth house, but you're definitely capable of teaching people about their sexuality and, different things that could be pleasurable to people, like very sexologist type of placement. You could be, I don't know, studying the history of sex, or studying the history of condoms, or studying the history of birth control or something like that. Or, studying the history of sex toys. Like, when was the first sex toy? Like, you want to kind of get into stuff like that, or whatever. But a sexologist could be really good, because Jupiter energy, like y'all need to feel like y'all kind of like the expert at something, and sexologist, that sounds very like official. um, or obviously a sex therapist is always a good thing. You could like literally, and even Mars, I forgot to mention this about Mars in the eighth house, you could be the demonstrator when it comes to, sexual things, like I'm gonna show you how to do this type of thing. So that's another thing for Jupiter in the eighth house. Jupiter is very religious. Well, let me rephrase that. Jupiter is very spiritual, okay, and can be religious. So your ideas on sex or death or anything that seems to be taboo, spirits, demons, it could have worked in two ways. Like when you were young, you could have maybe grown up in a very religious family and kind of like wanted to, rebel because you're so like sequestered and you're so like stifled, like all of this energy is stifled and you just like want to burst. You need to burst out of that big ass bubble because that's that Jupiter energy that's going on. You got to be free, you know what I'm saying? And that includes sexually free, that includes emotionally free, so you could have had that kind of stifling as a child, and things like that, and grew up in a very like religious or spiritual household. As you get older, though, I believe you develop your spirituality, and it's usually very different from other people. All water house energies are very spiritual and intuitive and things like that. But when you have Jupiter there, you really kind of want to delve into kind of like other aspects of spirituality, like not particularly organized religion, like what is dark, what is the taboo, like, voodoo or, African spirituality or different ways of healing. And obviously you may travel, of course, because Jupiter, right, to different places to understand how they heal, in other countries or with other cultures and things of that nature. So Jupiter in the eighth is like all about just delving in deep into learning things about whatever's dark, whatever is taboo, whatever is kind of off the beating path, so to speak. Jupiter in the eighth house, a good thing about Jupiter in the eighth house, you could be susceptible to gaining a lot of wealth through other people. You know what I'm saying? So that's a good thing, but you could also find yourself in a shit ton of debt because remember the eighth house also represents debt too. So, Jupiter giveth and Jupiter taketh away. Jupiter doesn't really taketh away. Jupiter giveth and Jupiter can be hot air. It just can seem too good to be true. And then, it's like really not, you know what I'm saying? Unfortunately, also with Jupiter in the eighth house, you can experience a lot of death. Remember, Jupiter expands things. So Jupiter in the eighth house experience a lot of deaths around you. So it's not even like a particular person like some of the other planets. It could just literally be a lot of people in your life that you've grown close to, that you have developed intimate bonds with, and they pass, you know what I'm saying? And that causes you to evolve, and that usually causes you to delve deeper into, research and learning, certain things. Maybe they died of some type of, weird disease that you can't put your finger on, and you go and you research that, you know what I'm saying? And, things of that nature. So that could definitely be a possibility with this placement. Jupiter in the eighth is also the like jovial, optimistic kind of vibe that Jupiter usually gives off is not as prevalent in the eighth house. I won't say it's a complete pessimist per se, because it's still Jupiter, right? But the things that Jupiter in the eighth house are happy about and optimistic about can sometimes be very dark and gloomy to other people. You know what I'm saying? So, I don't even really have a great example off the top of my head, but it's just, like I said before, a little off the beating path in terms of what kind of makes them feel happy and what kind of makes them feel fulfilled. And it's usually when they're learning, so they could be learning about serial killers. Eighth house is a prominent place for serial killers and criminals and things of that nature, and that can give someone with Jupiter in the eighth house a lot of pleasure, or it could be really enjoyable for them. Jupiter in the eighth house could be a really good counselor. You know how they have like the psychologists and stuff go to the prisons and speak to the people on death row, or the serial killers, the just real crazy ones. Jupiter in the eighth house has like the balls enough to be able to do that, because it's like they have enough knowledge and enough of a kind of like sense of humor, like kind of fun vibe about them. Because remember, still Jupiter, but they can talk about the dark shit, right? Y'all could probably catch these serial killers off guard with your questions and things like that, and just kind of have them be like, shit, are you the killer or me? You know what I'm saying? But yeah, Jupiter in the eighth house is it's very interesting. It's a world of expansion, because you're mixing expansion with transformation and evolution. So there's always an opportunity to transform through learning. You know what I'm saying? Through learning, and through, research, and through different cultures and different countries, traveling to different places and things like that. You know what I recently saw? And I actually meant to mention this in another eighth house video that I was doing, but it was something about psychic kids or something like that. And there were these traveling like psychics, they were traveling psychics, and they were helping these younger kids because they experienced, seeing the spirits and the demons and things like that. So would you look at that? You can be a traveling psychic because, Jupiter energy, they love to travel. So why not travel doing your occult things? A traveling healer, so to speak. So, yeah, and particularly centered on really, really deep emotional trauma. Like we're talking about, the sexual assaults, the rapes, the murders, the emotional, the physical abuse, the domestic abuse, the neglect, the sexual issues, sexuality, the LGBTQ. Like Jupiter in eighth is about healing the deep shit. Okay. All of that deep shit that is, pummeling away for people. And they really need to speak to somebody about that. Yeah. And I would think that Jupiter in eighth house, they would have a lot of wisdom. Jupiter in general has a lot of wisdom, but then when you put it in the eighth house, it's like, oh, they've been through shit too. They're not just like this happy, jolly person who just says cliches, look, or cliche type of phrases and stuff like that and be on their way. No, they have a lot of it would derive from personal experience, and they can give real sound advice. So I think that Jupiter in eighth house, low-key, I'm not mad at that placement, because the eighth house can be very difficult to deal with. So if you have a little bit of light, a little bit of abundance that's there, I mean, you may have had a lot of people die in your life, but you may have been getting that money. I'm not, you know what I'm saying? You may have just been able to acquire a lot of money from other people, not necessarily because other people died, but coincidentally, that may be what's happening. People go out of your life, money comes into your life. Jupiter in the eighth. Nothing makes sense in the eighth house. Wait till I get to the 12th, child, because girl, nothing is really going to make sense when I get to the 12th house. That'll probably happen in 2022. Knowing me, how long it takes me to get these videos up. No, I'm going to make sure that it doesn't happen like that. So yeah, so that's pretty much all I have to say about Jupiter in the 8th house. I'm trying to make sure that I didn't forget anything. But if I did, and you happen to have this placement and this resonated with you, be sure to put your stories in the comments and your, takeaways and anything of that nature. And remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Share with your friends and things like that. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.